And good morning, friends, and welcome to the Gristmill on a beautiful, sunshiny Thursday. My name's Chris. I am the general manager here at the Gristmill. And today, our virtual field trip is all about apples. The truth is, one of the things that makes this place special is how many different heritage apple varieties we have on site. We have close to 80. A lot of these apple varieties you probably have never heard of before and have definitely never seen in the store. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. Some of them are, maybe don't look perfect. Some of them maybe don't store or ship particularly well. And sometimes just tastes have changed. So it's not surprising that some of these varieties aren't commercially available anymore. That said, they're still interesting, and there are opportunities to use a lot of these varieties. We're getting back into making more apple cider here in British Columbia, for example, and they're looking at those old varieties as the ones that have the best flavor and the most interesting qualities to make a really good cider. So some of the varieties we have here on site are really, really special. Now, what I'm going to do this morning with you is we're going to look through our lower orchard here together and look at some of the apple trees that we've got, because I want to introduce you to the parts of an apple tree. And it's still pretty early in the season. If we come up to this one right here, for example, you'll notice that it's still looking pretty bare. The leaves are just starting to pop out now. Pretty soon, in another couple of weeks, those will be fully open and we'll have some flowers on them. Those will get pollinated. The rest of the leaves will come out, and we'll have apples in the fall. Well, sometimes in the summer and sometimes in the fall. Now, to start off and introduce you to an apple tree up close, we're going to come over to this one, which I've decided is the prettiest for our purposes this morning. There it is, right there. Now, one of the things that people don't always realize about apples is that apples are usually at least two different trees put together. You see, apples, if you try to grow them from a seed and you just grow the plant, what you get is probably not going to be a very tasty apple. Most apple varieties don't grow from the seed to match what the parent was. Instead, what you have to do if you want to keep a particular kind of apple is you actually have to cut off a piece of the tree and put it onto roots that you've grown specially just to handle that top part. So, for example, not far from here, about 2 miles that direction actually, there is an orchard that got really lucky, and they had a tree pop up out of nowhere that was a combination of a couple of different varieties that had already been growing. And it turns out that not only was it absolutely delicious, but it was also really good for shipping. It was really good for storing. And it was so tasty that they named that variety Ambrosia. Now, they have that one, we call it a mother tree. They have that one mother tree of Ambrosia. Now, every other Ambrosia tree in the world comes originally from a clipping off of that tree, put onto roots. Now, that tree's going to grow up. Well, you can then take a clipping from that tree and make more and multiply them out. And there's millions of Ambrosia apple trees all over the world now. But to think that only less than 30 years ago, there was one tree sitting in an orchard in Cawston that is now, one of the most popular apple varieties in Canada. And this sort of thing is happening all the time. People find interesting apples growing, or sometimes the tree itself actually produces a slightly different variety. You see, it can happen. It doesn't happen often, but it can happen that even on a particular branch, it'll actually produce slightly different apples. And so you end up with a slightly different variety. Now, that's all well and good, but to get good apples, we have to take good care of our apple tree. Now, what I have here that you're going to see mostly right now when we look close are lots of these. And these, let's go a little further back so it's in focus. These are where the flowers are going to come out soon. So there's a few leaves around it, and then there's 6 or so flowers that'll all come out in one bunch. When they're all open and the bees are busy buzzing around, they're going to move pollen, and they're going to pollinate these flowers, which are eventually going to drop their petals and swell up and turn into apples. The thing is, we don't actually want 6 apples to grow here. All we really want is one on each of these little, we call them spurs. So there's one here, and there's one here, and there's one here. We only want one on each spur. Now there's a couple of different things that we can do. The first thing that we can do is wait until the bees do their job and then pick them off by hand. But you can imagine that when you start looking at a whole tree, that's going to be a lot of thinning by hand to get rid of all that fruit. Another way that farmers have discovered is that the center flower, because it's one center flower usually surrounded by 5 or so, that one center flower makes the best fruit anyways, and it's the one to bloom first. So we let it bloom. There's a tractor driving by because it's the country. We let that one bloom. We get it pollinated, and then as quick as we can, after that one is pollinated, we spray the tree with something, sort of a mild chemical that kills all the other flowers except for the one in the center. And so I didn't have to do any hand thinning. I just did chemical thinning. Now, these are not harsh chemicals that we're talking about. We're talking about roughly the equivalent of baking soda and water, but it's enough to keep the fruit, to keep the flower from turning into fruit by getting pollinated. Now, the other thing that we have to do is earlier on in the season, we've got to prune our tree. We want to make sure this tree doesn't get too big, too out of control, and to make sure it's producing fruit for us. Now, that fellow who has the orchard that Ambrosia came from talks about pruning as systematic terror. What we actually want to do is we want to take this tree and we want to scare it. Because if we scare it, it's going to produce lots of babies. It's going to produce lots of fruit. And grown-ups, we know that this happens in disasters. Families get larger after disasters. It's just something that happens. So we want to scare this tree. And what we do is we cut off a bunch of the wood on it in a very organized way. But we cut off a bunch of the wood, make the branches shorter so that all these side branches grow instead, all the different side branches. Now, this tree right here is a good one. We've already done our pruning. We're already feeling pretty good about this one. Unfortunately, if I go down to the bottom of the tree here, this isn't a good example because it's hard to tell exactly where the join is between the roots, which is called rootstock. That's one plant, and the fruiting wood here, the scion, which is another one. So the join is behind this little piece of cardboard here. Now this cardboard is put here by a local agency that's checking for a particular kind of insect pest that will lay its eggs down in here, and when it turns into a larvae, it'll climb up the tree, and it'll end up in here and do its thing as it grows. At the end of the season, they'll take these off and see how many larvae are in there. That'll give them a sense on whether we have this particular kind of moth problem or not. So we're just going to leave that there. Unfortunately, it's covering where the join actually is. So let's find another tree that has a more obvious join. And I've got a great one right over here. Now, this one just shows you that sometimes the roots and the fruiting stalk above it can have very different characteristics. In fact, we aim for that. We want that on purpose. You choose the kind of roots based on how big you want the tree to get, based on things like what the climate is. Does it need to be able to handle lots of moisture or lots of dryness? Are there particular diseases you're trying to avoid? The root stock does a lot to support that plant and feed it. Well, this particular tree right here has a rootstock. You can see here's the union between the two. And look at this. The rootstock is so beefy, and it's pushing whatever it is. It's pushing a whole lot of nutrients up into this tree. But funny enough, it's pushing it effectively. I've only got one little sprout here coming off of the rootstock. Roots will do that sometimes. If they've got so much vigor and so much growth, they'll actually push these little suckers out. And we don't want that. And then the rest of this is the fruiting stalk. Now, I don't have to stop at one variety. I could graft a whole bunch of different varieties onto one rootstock, or even onto the fruiting stalk. I could do that if I wanted to, but it kind of stresses out the tree to have all of that. So we tend to stick to one, because actually, in general, we want a lot of trees of one variety if we're growing them commercially. We're a little different here at the grist mill because we've got one tree each of all these different kinds. Now, let's go back to our tree here for a second, because I just want to show you one other thing that I just noticed, but I got to see if I can find it again. Aha! So this one right here, it's hard to see. I'm going to see if I can focus in on it. You might see in the very tip, that very center flower is just starting to show a little bit of color. We're still a long ways from it opening up and becoming a flower and then getting pollinized and turning into an apple. But you can just see a little bit of that red right there. That's always a good sign. It's also a sign, though, that these buds are particularly tender. And the last thing that we want right now is any frost. It's been getting pretty cold at night. So hopefully no frost comes and kills these. That's not the kind of thinning that we want to have. So we have altogether, like I said, almost 80 different varieties of apple growing here at the Gristmill. But the truth is, there's well over 10,000 named varieties of apple in all of North America. And sometimes it can be really, really hard to know what variety you've got just by looking at it, just by tasting it. You know, you need a lot of clues to figure it out for sure. Now, some varieties are really popular, and so there's a good chance that it's going to match. A Red Delicious looks like a Red Delicious. It's kind of distinctive, things like that. But that isn't always the case. And then sometimes, especially with these old varieties, sometimes we've got the parents of a variety you know. One of my absolute favorites, actually, one of my favorite varieties of apple for fresh eating is something called the Grimes Golden. Now, Grimes Golden is an apple that looks an awful lot like a Golden Delicious, because actually we think that it's a parent of the Golden Delicious. It has just such a wonderful flavor. It's very perfumey, and it's got a really rich taste. I actually like it better than Golden Delicious by quite a bit. Now, I have lots of different apple books here on all sorts of different subjects. This one in particular is kind of fun because there's a local orchardist, a different local orchardist, my next door neighbor at home, actually. Let's see if I can find him. And this was, and he was very involved in helping with this book. Let's see if we can find him here. No, it doesn't look like I'm going to find his picture. Oh, there he is. There's Ron Schneider. He and his family grow a lot of cider apples for cider now. His son and daughter-in-law have a wonderful cidery called Twisted Hills in Coston. And so they're very interested in heritage varieties. But it's easy to really get into it and look at the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of varieties sitting right here just in this one book. This book has almost 2,000 varieties listed in it, just to give you an idea. So we love apples. Now, let me turn the camera back around again. Now, one last thing that I want to mention before we finish up today is that we also happen to have something else here. This is another apple tree, but it's actually a crab apple. Technically, crab apples are just small apples, but we think of sour, we think of, absolutely packed full of flavor, we think of a little bit wild. This is a crab apple tree that has some of my favorite crab apples for pickling, and it's a little further along than the other ones. You don't see any of the flowers ready to open yet, but you can see that the leaves are definitely coming out. So that's just a little bit about apples. There's a lot more to learn, and as we get the fruit, as we get the flowers, we're going to keep visiting these trees. We're going to go back and visit the chicks again next week as well. And don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the bee episode that I promised you. I just wanted to get a little more footage of busy bees in action, and the last 2 days have been windy and cold, and the bees have been in hiding. Hopefully today I'll be able to get that footage. I'll be able to add it to what I've already got, and I will upload my bee episode coming up pretty quick. Now tomorrow, it'd be really great for you to join us, because I'm going back into the kitchen. Last week on the Friday we baked bread, you might remember. Well, tomorrow we're going to have more fun. We're actually going to make candy together. So if you're interested, come and check us out tomorrow. Now, for those of you that are watching for the first time, if you're not familiar with the Gristmill, please visit our website at www.oldgristmill.ca. If you've been watching these videos for a while and you see fit to help us out a touch, I would really appreciate it. All our usual sources of funding don't exist at the moment, given the nature of the world as we speak. So visit our website and click on the support link. The best thing you can do is actually buy a season's pass to the site. I promise that if we're not open enough this season to make it worthwhile, you can use your pass next year. But that little bit of cash really will make a big difference for us, please. Otherwise, just spread the word. Tell more people about these broadcasts. Let people know that we're doing these basically every day at 10 a.m. right here on Facebook. Afterwards, when we've got the time, we take these and we upload them to YouTube as well. So if you want to go to the archive of them, you can visit our YouTube channel. I'll make sure I put that in the comments once this uploads to Facebook. Anyways, today's episode was all about apples. We're here at the Gristmill Gardens on a beautiful day in the Similkameen Valley. And I'll be seeing you again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. to make candy. We'll see you tomorrow, guys. Bye-bye.